Hi, do you wonder why, despite your best efforts, no matter what kind of advice you give to people, or no matter what you do or say, like the person you talk to simply doesn't get motivated? This could be your coworker, this could be a family member, or this could be somebody that you just honestly want to support, but they're not moving, they're not motivated. Well, if this is a challenge that you have experienced, then you will find this session super insightful. I'm very happy to welcome Professor Jonathan Lee today from Northern Arizona University. Together with Manage Magazine, we are very proud to have him here as he's an expert in motivational interviewing, working with all kinds of cases from supporting problematic kids and their parents to suicide prevention. Jonathan has a tremendous amount of experience, and I'm excited to have him here today as I have been going through his training, and he was actually the one that helped me to confront my writing reflex. With that, welcome to the School of Becoming, where we help people to go from paychecks to purpose. Today with Professor Jonathan Lee. Hi, John.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ingo. I appreciate being here and to be with all of you. It's really honoring that I have the opportunity to speak to so many of you. So thanks so much for being here. At the end of today's session, I'm hoping that you'll be able to kind of define MI and talk about the key concepts. I hope you'll also be able to describe the spirit of MI, which is the way in which we enter into the relationship with someone that we might be working with to avoid manipulation. It's very important to think about that spirit, and we'll learn more about that in a little bit. And then finally, also in today's session, we're going to talk about the skills of motivational interviewing. And those are open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Now, this is held by the acronym OARS, which is just a pretty simple way of thinking about the skills of MI. Now, if you join us for Thursday's session, we would really like to apply some of these skills, even though it'll be a shortened time frame and we'll use some pretty simple examples. Applying them with each other in breakout rooms or together in the larger room will really help us to kind of better understand what these skills are and how they might be applied. So I'd like you to think about yourself. Conversations about change typically happen within your work profession. So in the chat box on the side, if you don't mind, tell me who you are. Who do you work with? I'd like you to really think about experiences that you've had personally or in your own work as a coach, and that's the term that I'll be using today for clinician and for individuals who are supporting others and thinking about change. And I'd like you to think about who those people are. What is the typical way that you utilize these types of skills? So we'll wait a minute and look at the chat box. While you're considering that, tell me a little bit about what can go wrong when we're helping someone with change. On the other side of that, what goes really well? More importantly, and this affects coaches and clinicians quite a bit, research shows, what are the emotions that you might have had when there was a win and a fail, when you're really struggling to help someone think about change? And on the other side of that coin, how does the person across from you feel? How did you enter this relationship? Do they feel like you're pushing for change? Do they feel pressured? Do they feel that you don't understand or hear them? If those are true, then motivational interviewing probably is a tool that could be very, very beneficial to you. I won't pretend to read this definition to you, but I will highlight a few important aspects of it. Motivational interviewing deals with the language that the other or the client uses about the change they're most interested in. And you adopt that language as a way of equalizing the relationship. It's designed to promote their personal motivation, not ours, but their personal motivation for change and commitment to specific goals. It deals very much with what we call evocation, or eliciting from the individual their own thoughts about that change. In essence, these particular things help and support individuals as they talk themselves into change. We become collaborators rather than instructors or those who are telling someone exactly what they need to do for change. It's a strategic way to have a conversation about change. In some ways, it's more of a motivational conversation than it is an interview. And even those who developed MI would say that the word conversation fits much better than does interview. It can occur in any context like these that you've shared with us here today that you might use it in. And it's a matter of guiding and listening rather than directing and instructing individuals. The beauty of it is it takes us out of the expert role and we meet people where they are. In essence, helping them talk themselves into change. What's most important for you to take away from today's 50-minute session is the idea that how people speak about change influences their actual behavior. The idea behind motivational interviewing is to influence the individual's change talk, talking about change, rather than highlighting and influencing their sustain talk, which is all those reasons why someone might not wish to change. So if it's okay, I'm going to share a real-world example from my world of working with college students who at times can present for various challenges. This is Zach. He happens to be a PhD student of mine from back at the University of Cincinnati. And I want you to pay close attention to the video as I interact with him, because my approach here seems to shift the focus away from his motivation and away from his commitment to change. So let's try this one on. How can I help you?
I guess recently I've been having some trouble balancing my time between work and spending time with my friends. Like, I feel like I'm not putting as much emphasis on some of my friendships, and I feel like those are kind of starting to fall by the wayside. But at the same time, I feel like I'm putting almost too much emphasis on work, where like I'm getting kind of burned out in that area.
I know the story completely. I feel like I'm just overworked all the time. It is so hard to balance those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. There's just so much work going on that I feel like I really want to do well with that, and it's a responsibility of mine, but at the same time, like, I have some personal things I'd like to spend more time with friends too.
Have you tried putting it into a schedule, like into your day planner, really like blocking out time?
I don't know if a schedule would really, I mean, I haven't really thought about doing that. No, I mean, my work's pretty structured as far as the schedule goes, but like, I don't really think that scheduling friend stuff in that sort of way really works.
It's worked for me, believe me. I mean, I literally block out 2 or 3 hours a day where I say this is what I need to do, whether it's the store or whatever it might be. Actually writing it in my agenda.
I mean, I understand how that might work, but I mean, my friends have schedules and stuff too, and so like, it seems like you're almost losing the part of it where it's supposed to be friendship, like you're making it almost like a business sort of.
Oh, it seems that way at first, but it really works out, and people understand. I mean, you really are busy. You're doing a lot in your life, so but people will understand. I think. Don't you think they'll understand?
I would hope they would understand, but I mean, you've never really met my friends before, so I mean, I don't really know. I feel like we might be coming from two different positions on this.
Do your friends have the same problem?
Some of them do. Yeah, it just depends on how much they have to work. But I mean, I have some that are always up for hanging out and stuff like that, and I feel like those are the ones that I feel the worst about, because I'm always having to say no, or I'm choosing things instead of them.
It sounds like the conflict's kind of both ways. They're awfully busy too, you're awfully busy. It sounds like there's a meshing that's not happening very well there.
I guess you could say that, yeah. There does seem to be some on either side, but I don't really know what their situation is as much as I know mine, so I kind of feel like most of the responsibility is on me.
Yeah, maybe if you all got together then and kind of talked this through and said, you know, maybe we all need to schedule this. Just make time for ourselves as a group, but let's like plan it out.
Like a group meeting?
Oh yeah, like a group scheduling session.
That doesn't really sound like something that my friends and I would ever do. And I have friends in different circles too, so it's not, I think it would be a little weird to have them all come together and... Painful for those of you who are coaches. Painful interactions. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? Feel free to type it in the chat box if you have some answer to that question. More importantly, how did Zach feel? I'll wait for a couple of responses. I tried to push my idea. He felt not heard, pressured.
telling him what he could do better. Rick, he probably did feel awful. Yes. I felt like I wanted to cringe as well. Leading questions. Thank you very much. Very perceptive. Rejection of his own insight. He felt disconnected. One of the challenges that we have here in motivational interviewing, of course, is this idea that in the world of best friends, pushing someone, his voice wasn't getting across, pressuring him towards change, providing unsolicited advice, all of these have been demonstrated to be roadblocks. If you think back years ago to Thomas Gordon's research, roadblocks to communication strategies. But they're the most common things that we see when we record conversations about change and code them for the types of language that the clinician or the coach is using at that time. So I have now another example for you that I'd like you to listen to. In this example here, I've annotated the video a little bit to highlight some of the evocative questions, simple changes in the way that I ask questions that shift the purpose for the discussion back to Zach. Listen to the difference here and let me know what you think afterwards.
What are the downsides of working so much in terms of your friends?
In terms of my friends, I just don't have as much time to see them. Like I've noticed there's some times where I'll see like they're off doing certain things, and I might not have necessarily even got invited to do it just because they've started to assume like he won't be able to do that. Which is true, I wouldn't be able to do it anyway, but like it's still kind of...
They know your work.
Yeah, it still sort of hits you like, oh, like it would have been nice to ask, but I totally understand why.
And if you were to balance this equally, what's the difference in your friendships and your relationships with them?
I just feel like I feel more included or closer to them.
What are some things that you have in you, strength-wise, that you think you can apply to this issue and help to work it out?
I think I'm a pretty good planner, I guess. Like I'm pretty good at budgeting my time for certain things. I think that will definitely help. I think I'm thoughtful to a certain extent. So even if I don't have as much time for my friends necessarily, I can still like carve out, even if it's a little bit of time, but really make that time count. Which I think is something that I could probably use to my advantage. And for work stuff, I feel like I do well most of the time. So I'm wondering if I don't need to do as, like sometimes I put sort of this extra sort of pressure on myself to do so well that maybe like it's okay if I don't do as well all the time. Like whatever I'm going to do is still going to be good enough. So like, I don't know, I get into this thought sometimes where like maybe I don't need to apply so much energy to this. And then I'd have more left over for like personal life stuff.
I mean, you're a planner.
Yes.
Shows up in your work, could show up in your friendship relationships. You're thoughtful, and you think that you might be able to carve out special, unique opportunities to gather together with your friends. And you're starting to realize you put in 110% at work, and maybe 100% is all that's necessary to allow some time for other things.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, what's the worst thing that might happen if this balance doesn't occur? And then on the other side of that, what's the best thing that would happen if you really are able to find this balance?
Well, I guess worst thing could go either one of two ways. So like the one way would be it falls completely on the work side, and then I don't really have much going on outside of that.
Okay.
Which I don't think would be good. And then the other side of that would be I don't put as much emphasis on work, and then that sort of doesn't go as well as it should. And I feel like almost from like a pride standpoint, like that would start to affect me negatively, where I'd be like, I should be doing better than this. And like I have people that I work with, I think are also important that I have a responsibility to them that I don't want to let them down. So I feel like I start to think about that. But if it went really well, then like I feel like I could do well at work, but still have enough time left over where I just know like there's gonna be time for my friends, and they'll sort of have an idea of when I'd be able to do stuff too.
And so, what did you see, hear, feel in this situation? Give me some insights. Very perceptive Buck. He talked a lot more. He seemed comfortable. Room to breathe is really an interesting thought, Mallory. At one point, he even hesitated, and I didn't jump in, right? I let him sit. I let him think back. His own ideas were in response to my questions. More relaxed, more expressive. I like that. That's also quite perceptive. Smiling, a little giggle every now and then. That's right. No recommendations for me. I tried to balance what I was doing based on the language that I heard from him, based in response to what I heard from him. I didn't shy away from sustained language, sustained talk. I even said, what's the worst thing that could happen? Go ahead and tell me. What's the best thing that could happen? You always leave with the best, though, right? Leave with the hopeful. He smiled a lot more. He showed some positive emotional reactions when he realized some things. He was doing his own thinking around this piece. And it was a simple shift in my approach to, in this case, one of these skills, questioning strategies that I used with Zach. A simple shift. So the underlying theory here, and I won't bore you with too much theory, only 3 slides of it, I promise. You can go to a website later and read some more about it if you're interested. But when we push for change, we typically get discord, not resistance. People are not resistant. We create resistance. We do as the coaches and clinicians. But discord is that uneasy relationship feeling that I think you saw in the first video. You see individuals feeling disrespected. You see them feeling pressured. They feel as though their voice doesn't really matter. They feel as though they have to defend themselves. Whoa, John, I don't need a planner. That's not my thing. Change is very unlikely in these situations. But when we switch our perceptions and elicit change talk, when we use questions and reflections and summaries and affirmations that the only answer to is to discuss that change that might come, we have engagement. We have individuals that feel respected. They feel heard. They feel as though you're with them in the present moment. And they understand more, however implicitly that might be, that this is their change process, not someone else's ideas about that change process. What we have to realize here when we work as coaches, as clinicians, and change agents, as life coaches, that ambivalence is an extremely natural feeling. And if there is no ambivalence, motivational interviewing doesn't work. I'll give you examples. When I work with teachers and helping them improve their classroom practice, if I have a teacher that says, no, these kids just need to know right from wrong before they get to me, I don't have to deal with that. They should know what's right and they should know what's wrong. I'm not going to get myself involved in that behavioral classroom management stuff. No ambivalence. Very difficult to reveal what needs to come next. But people with ambivalence have an argument, one side and the other, the little devil and angel on your shoulder. I really should. I really don't want to. I really should. This is a beautiful place for motivational interviewing and slipping in and accentuating the change talk, elevating the change talk, which means that you, in essence, need to learn to filter language between sustain and change. Sustained talk is not ignored, but it's certainly not amplified. It's certainly, we don't ask questions about it. We don't highlight it and bring it up. We do that with change talk, however. And so when Zach was speaking, I could have simply added reflections about his change talk within that second interview. That's some of the ideas that we'll be practicing on Thursday if you join us there. And so we have to remember that there really is a language that we all use when we're considering change. And what we want to do is represented by these cogs here. We want change talk to dominate the discourse of this conversation. Sustained talk is an equally important piece of what we do. It is right in there. It helps our entire machine to move. It shouldn't be ignored. It shouldn't be put away. In fact, there's a real magic when you're heard using sustained talk. If something is difficult and your partner, coach, or clinician says, that's really hard, I get it, that is hard. There's a magic in that that brings people to you. We usually call that stumbling. And here in a minute, I have a video for you, a perfect example of this. Discord is yet another cog in our wheel. Relationships don't always go well. People bring to the table challenges, biases, the feelings that you have, the challenges with the individual who may have an emergency outside of the change process that you've already established with the individual. And discord has to be addressed. You have to stop and say, wow, I really feel as I've said something that went a little beyond and was a little pushy. Let's take that back. Let's rewind. Let me start again. We have to own discord when we feel it, and it has to be addressed. Typically, how I coach most individuals is to understand, as a coach or a clinician or as a consultant, that you need to take that on your own shoulders. I created that. When we start to blame or label someone as resistant, the entire relationship breaks down. And so it's important to realize what I made poor Ingo so painfully aware of when we were working together. I call it the fixing reflex these days, but the fixing reflex is really something that all of us who have a compassionate soul and are working with others to help them change have within us. We have the tendency to help. We want to solve the problem. My wife would tell you that this is a male problem, but I don't think it really is just for men. We all have this in us. Picture yourself with a middle school child who comes to you, whether they're your own or someone else's, and says, oh, I have this problem and I just don't know what to do. Our first inclination is to tell them what to do. Here's how it should be. Here's what's worked for me. Those are such giant roadblocks to people's energy when they're really considering change. And so when we offer advice, when we offer information, personal experiences that are unsolicited, like in my first video example, we put up roadblocks. It tends to be a stopper, a dampener in this process. And so here's a pretty nifty video that some of you may have seen, some of you may have not. I apologize right off the bat for the stereotypical way that it shows men as fixers and they have to fix it. But it is a video that really demonstrates this issue that we've been talking about here. And so there is a magic. What you saw there was a stumbling. You saw someone who understood that what they were doing was so much pressure, so much movement. They were pointing out the obvious when sometimes it's not about the nail. It's about being heard. When we feel understood, when someone stops and just says, wow, that is such a challenge, and leaves it, which is hard to do in and of itself, right? Our tendency is to go on and on and on. This individual feels less defensive. They're more open to the relationship with others. They are more able to consider change when they've stumbled into you. She said, yes, thank you. Put her hand on his arm like, yes, it's that simple. And now the conversation can move forward, allowing the individual to express themselves in that way. This is one aspect of motivational interviewing that is probably some of the most important pieces, is the idea that we're allowing the space for the individual to be heard, and that our questions, our affirmations, our reflective practice, our summaries tend to be those that allow the individual to express themselves rather than our implicit kind of biases coming into play. What you should do, how you should do it. I really think you should just take the nail out of your head. It's not about the nail. It's about the process of being heard and the process of the individual building their own solutions to the problem. Eventually, especially in this example, the solution is getting the nail out of the head. But that's not the point in the change process. The change process is about the individual. It's about their expression, their feelings, their desires. And what was needed there was simply to be heard, sometimes the first steps in the change process. And so I have for you here some communication tips that I'll leave you with today I have some more discussion right after this about the full nature of motivational interviewing so that you'll have a picture of what you're coming into. But I want to just take some time here to ask you a favor. If you're going to join us on Thursday, which I certainly hope that you do, can you commit to a conversation with another person prior to Thursday? And think about these tips during that conversation. I wouldn't think about them all, but I'd choose one. And I would take that one in and utilize it as you go into this conversation about change with someone. And so here's the tips that I think are most important for you as you think about fulfilling that promise to Ingo and I of trying some of this out just a little bit. The first one, talk less, listen a lot more. Someone I think noticed earlier, maybe it was Mallory, that it was the idea that Zach talked a lot more in my second example. Exactly what we want. A clinician that is using motivational interviewing wants a lot of talk from the client because you can pick out little gems, GEMS, diamonds in the rough, to use those as you reflect back to people. Talking less means that you are filtering change and sustained talk. You know, I really think I should do that. Change talk. But my God, my calendar's so full. Sustained talk. If I hear that in one sentence, let's say from Ingo, and he says, wow, I really should do that, but my calendar's so full. My choice as a clinician, as a coach, is to then ask about the change part of that sentence. What would it like if you did that? What would it be like if you did that more? Simply put, avoiding the human tendency to go towards sustained talk and say, oh yeah, my calendar's jammed. I never have time for anything. That doesn't add to the argument for that individual. Simply making that decision after you've filtered their language allows you to explore the change aspect of what they're saying to you more than add weight to the balance of the kind of little teeter-totter that we have here towards the sustained side. So filter change and sustain talk. Practice that as you listen to people here over the next couple of days. You'll be very surprised how it comes out. Please also know that change and sustain talk comes in the same exact sentence, same paragraph, right? People don't always just use change talk and then they're done. It's both in there, and that's the point at which a clinician chooses what to add weight to in terms of the argument. Reflective listening. If you think back to the piece with Zach, at one point I spoke back to him his strengths. He says, I'm a good planner, I'm good with my friends, I really work hard, I do these things. And I said to him, so you're a planner, you work hard, you're good to your friends. You realize these are things that can help you make this change. In essence, all of that talk is building up weight on that side of the argument. Reflective listening can also be very, very simple. As you saw the gentleman who was with the individual who had the nail in the head. That person simply said, this is hard. That's a reflection. Doesn't add a lot of value, doesn't add a lot of weight, but it does simply acknowledge someone for what they've said. Simple kinds of reflections like that are best when you hear sustained talk. Asking really heightened questions about change talk really helps to elevate that beyond what was just said by the individual. The third component of talking less and listening more is staying in the moment, staying in the present. Don't tumble over the top of the readiness of the individual. In my first video with Zach, you heard me telling him what I thought I could do. You could just block this out in your schedule. Get yourself a planner book. Don't your friends use planner books? I'm not in the moment at that time. I'm way out in front of him, way beyond where he is. I'm not staying in the moment, allowing him to kind of revel in his own thought process around that. So talking less, listening more is filtering change and sustained talk, being a reflective listener, providing back what you've heard from people, and staying in the moment. My second tip for you to think about as you move into this coming Thursday and your commitment to trying to speak with one person, thinking about one of these aspects, would be to tame your desire to fix things. When we hear sustained talk in particular, this need and compassion that we have wells up within us to help them fix it. It's a perfectly logical, sensible, helpful behavior. But it's from you, not from the individual who's considering this change. And we know that the more autonomy that an individual has in discussing their own change, the more likely they are to enact that change outside of your relationship. The more autonomy that you build in someone, taming your desire to tell them what to do, but asking them questions about the change, like asking them to explain it further, connecting it to their life, connecting it to their own values, will more than likely tip the balance so they're able to move out and perform that change outside of your relationship. And so to tame that fire, tame that desire to fix things, avoid confrontation and persuasion in particular. You heard me with Zach say, don't you think that'll work? Persuasion. Confrontation sometimes is very direct. Hey, smoking is really bad for you. You need to cut it out. Confrontation and persuasion have a long, long empirical history of being roadblocks to conversational change. Avoid unsolicited advice. We often want to help fix things by telling it how it worked for us. The younger the person, by the way, the more prone we are to try to give advice. So if you're working with young folks, students, I think someone said they're working with, or young clients, remember that this is going to well up in you even more rigorously with a lot of strength that you're going to have to tamp it down. So taming the desire to fix has two components: avoiding confrontation and persuasion, and avoiding unsolicited advice. There are many times when people ask you, what do you think? Your best way around that is to say, well, I've got an idea and I'd like you to share it with you, but you have to be the judgment on whether it's going to work for you. If it doesn't fit, let's move on, right? This is about you. So you ask permission before you kind of move into that. Finally, in terms of autonomy, helping people consider these change pieces themselves. In terms of autonomy, we really want to think about the term evocation or eliciting from the other individual. I want to ask for their ideas. If you remember the little slide on ambivalence that had the teeter-totter of change and sustain, I want you to remember that anybody that's considering change has thought about it a lot. They've thought about ways to do it. They've thought about all the roadblocks that are going to keep them from doing it. They've thought about the benefits of it. They've thought about the hardships when trying to apply it. They've been down the sustain and change road with any type of behavior that they might be thinking about changing. And so one of the best places for us to start is to ask for their ideas. And even to begin that sentence by saying, I know you've put a lot of thought into this. You've really been thinking about this. And then be specific. Tell me about ideas or ways you think you could change this behavior. What's worked in the past? Tell me your considerations. And remember, finally, in terms of autonomy, much like unsolicited advice, ask permission to share your ideas. Make sure that you're not being too persuasive, too confrontational in the way in which you move in with a change behavior or a change conversation. So if you think about it, before Thursday, consider trying one of these on. It's like a coat, right? It's different for everybody. MI does not box in your style or make you become one type of a person or clinician or coach. You're still yourself in your own style. You have a coat of many colors, you have a suit coat on, whatever you might wear, raincoat today for me in Flagstaff, you have to try these things on and feel them out. Keep it in the front of your mind as you work with someone around these pieces. Now we've got 15 minutes left. What I'd like to do is stop for a moment and see if there's any burning questions that someone would like to ask. And then I'm going to describe the full component structure of motivational interviewing Remember, we only have 2 hours, so I can't go in too deep with you. But I do want to highlight what motivational interviewing is. And I'll do that right after this. Right now, I'd like to ask if there's anybody that has anything that they'd like to ask, any burning questions, any thoughts. You're free to voice those thoughts or write them in here. The Bob Newhart video, says Rick. Yeah, that's a really good one too, actually. No thoughts, no questions, still so new? We're okay to move forward? I'm just making sure. Oh, what if a person isn't asking for change? Right, when there's no ambivalence, motivational interviewing is not your bag of tricks. When someone is steadfast, doesn't want to consider, doesn't want to make any changes whatsoever, motivational interviewing isn't it. There's other clinical styles that you can utilize to help individuals in that state. It's not motivational interviewing. What if someone's goal is harmful to themselves or others? We all are duty-bound in our professions, and that may not be true for all of you, but for the majority of you, if you're working with someone in a professional sense, you are duty-bound to report harmful behavior to the appropriate authority. So what I would do then is to turn you back to your own program, your own institutions, procedures for dealing with these kinds of situations. The work that we're doing right now in suicide prevention is much more about helping them stay in a conversation about their feelings, being engaged. We're not trying to persuade or prevent or etc. We're trying to keep them engaged in a conversation. So if the goal that someone has that is to be harmful to themselves, we are typically duty bound. For example, as a teacher, I'm absolutely 100% duty bound to report that behavior. And I typically do that in tandem with the individual who is having those challenges. I want to describe to you then motivational interviewing in kind of its full clothed look, so that you can get an idea of the complexity that we're working with here and the complexity of kind of the skill set overall, and why it does take, 8 to 9 hours to really get a firm, proficient handle on motivational interviewing. We enter into these conversations with individuals with a spirit, with a way, with an approach that helps us avoid manipulation. If I enter into this with someone in a partnership sense, collaborative, throwing off my mantle of expert and finding people where they are and being with them in their conversations, staying in the moment with them rather than moving forward. Acceptance is not approval. However, it is showing that I am alongside of you. I am here with you, and I'm going to stay with you during this work that we have together. Rick, I'm going to get to that question in a minute. That's a really good one I see in the chat box here. Thank you for presenting it to me. Compassion is the third element of the spirit, which we all have when we're in the helping field like this. It can overwhelm us, remember, that the compassion is where the writing or the fixing reflex wells up in our desire to help them make that change immediately. Finally, evocation, meaning that I am eliciting from the individual their thoughts and concerns, their considerations for this change, and trying to avoid giving them mine. There's a roadmap for motivational interviewing that helps us when we're thinking about behavior change options. Because like anyone, if you're working with someone, they might have multiple thoughts about what to change. I could change this. I could do this. I've been thinking about that. Think of a juggler with lots of balls in the air, right? Well, each of those are a change target, possibly. And so there's process, a roadmap that we use to help us navigate through these various ideas that they have. The first one is engagement, getting to know someone's values, getting to know what their future perspectives are, what their goals are. The second is focusing. As we're juggling all those red balls in the air, we might stop, present it to the person and say, does this one have priority right now in your life? No? How about this one? Does that have priority in your life? Focusing is this kind of never-ending attempt to get a narrow focus on one particular behavior that an individual might be wanting to change. Evocation of importance is next. You heard me with Zach. asking about, well, so what would it be like with your friends if you were to balance your life right now? What might be different? I'm trying to bring from him what it is that they want to do to change. And so this brings me to Rick's comment that's in the chat box, an MI type question. Can you tell me more about why you don't want to change? What I would encourage you to do, Rick, is to flip that to ask about the why you do want to change. This question would bring about lots of sustained talk. Now, we might ask the person, what's not so hot about your present situation? What's not good about the status quo? And if I ask it in that sense, they're voicing some importance to change. Well, I can't ever see my friends. You know, it's hard for me to, when they go out to the bar, I can't go with them because I don't have this good balance in my life yet. That's motivating for an individual, talking about what could be. So I might ask you, Rick, just to flip that question when you think about it. Planning is the third step in our roadmap. That is very discrete, smart goals, actionable goals that you plan with so that the next time you meet with someone, you can go through each step and talk about the barriers to completing that, the challenges that they had. Finally, then, are the skills of motivational interviewing. Many of these you'll be extremely familiar with. We'll go into a little bit more detail about these next time. But they get pretty progressively harder as you go down this list, right? Open-ended questions, you're all really probably adept and understand these quite well. Questions that continue the conversation, allow the person to bring in their own perspectives. Affirmations, which means affirmations of behavior change or mobilizing towards behavior change. These are the least used skills in motivational interviewing, believe it or not, because we save them until they're very, very purposeful. Affirmations are not, hey, good job, glad you're here, nice to see you, way to go. Those are valuable, please, particularly the younger the client. But an affirmation is very, very specific. It is about attempts to change behavior, thought processes on the change talk side, describing steps for change. We want to affirm those movements toward change. Reflective practice is the third skill that we use here. There's two types, as I kind of alluded to before. There's a very simple reflection. This is when I speak back to the person the words that they might have used. Simple reflections are best for sustained talk. Oh gosh, I'm too busy. There's no way I can do that. You're a busy person. Don't add a lot of weight to that. Don't add value to that. Don't expand on it. But keep it in that simple piece. Complex reflections then are those reflections that try to ask specifically about change talk. And they help to kind of move us forward in that idea. What would it be like if you were to change this behavior 100%? What would your future look like in 3 or 4 years, etc.? Summaries are just a tool, right? Time's up, we got to summarize so we can move on to the next thing. We're on a topic that isn't going anywhere. Let's move on. I'll give you a little summary of what you just said. It's really good for strengths and feelings. Like you saw me with Zach, he said, here's all my strengths. And I kind of summarized that back to him in a reflection. And so these are the 3 components of motivational interviewing. There's a spirit in which we enter into this relationship so that we're not manipulative. There's a roadmap that are processes that we follow. And that roadmap is about an individual change target, not about the meeting, but individual change targets. And then there's skills that we utilize in motivational interviewing as well that can be measured, and the quality of those skills can be measured in research orientation as well. Rick has posted that he's happy to connect with anybody about behavior change. I'll be going there soon. I have another one of these right afterwards. Helen, in today's world, parents tend to affirm their child's behavior every time they do anything well. Like, good job. Does this become overused and lose significance? I suppose it can. And motivational interviewing, the idea is to choose very selected behaviors to affirm. Behaviors that are about mobilizing change and or effort. If you know anything about the growth-oriented mindset, effort needs to be affirmed rather than just products at times. Well, I have for you here a site. I will post it up here in the chat as well for you all here in just a little bit. Would ask if there's any last minute questions that you might have of me before we end with Ingo.
John, there was one question from Usman who asked, how do you tackle situations which involve loss and sorrow?
Yeah, so it's important at this time that we take kind of an equal stance across the individual's feelings, and that we acknowledge those feelings as sincerely and deeply as we possibly can. But that we keep a state of equilibrium with the individual, asking questions that might not lean one direction or the other, but asking them to revel or to experience that loss with you in this time frame so that they might be able to move forward. So for example, in some of the work that we're doing with suicide prevention, individuals that have ideation because of loss, we ask them questions that might help them to experience that with someone rather than outside of this relationship where they might be very unstable and these decisions can be very instantaneous. You know, suicide typically is not planned. It's a very instantaneous decision. So you can ask people questions like, tell me how that feels physically. Tell me how that's affecting you emotionally. Tell me how you've helped yourself to deal with these things. So remember that motivational interviewing might not be the best case scenario to move into somebody that has experienced a great loss, because they may be very, very, very confused about what they need to do. And so staying at a very equal plane will allow them to think about the pros and cons of their next steps, their next choices, where they might end up, or how that emotion might be feeling them, might be hampering their decisions to move forward. I wish I had better answers for that question, because it's with deep, deep emotions that it's the most challenging for any clinician at any time.
Thank you for going through the session. As you might have seen, like, this session comes in two parts. The next part will be online and you can click somewhere on the screen to actually watch it. That said, as always, the best way to learn is to engage in the session. We have live sessions every Tuesday and Thursday. So if you're interested in engaging in free university level education in regards to personal mastery and becoming, make sure to head over to theschoolofbecoming.org, where you will find our free upcoming sessions.